Quick disclaimer. Opinions of host and guest do not represent the views or opinions of Functional Movement Systems. Always consult your physician before beginning any exercise program. This general information is not intended to replace your healthcare professional. Welcome to the Movement Podcast. This show is all about movement. We tackle it from different angles, bring on guests, answer questions, go on a few tangents, and give practical advice, giving you guys a better idea of how you can optimize the human body to be the best it can be. Let's preview what's coming up in this episode. Today, we talk with our guest, AJ Neibel. He is the head strength and conditioning coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. AJ discusses the NFL Combine, COVID's impact on training, sports science, and trends within the pro strength and conditioning ranks, programming for NFL players, and much more. It's a packed show with tons of inside information. So lace up and get ready for this episode of the Movement Podcast, powered by FMS. Today we have AJ Neibel. Thanks for coming to be with us on the show today.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So to introduce you to our audience, you've worked in the NFL for almost 2 decades, including time with the Raiders, Falcons, and Jaguars. You hold degrees in sports psychology, physical therapy, and you are a certified NSCA strength and conditioning specialist. And currently, you sit as the head strength and conditioning coach for the Las Vegas Raiders. Last year, the Raiders actually moved to Las Vegas. Mm-hmm. So new city, new facility, new stadium, all during a global pandemic.
Correct.
So
yes.
No way to say it other than you've had a pretty eventful 2020, right?
Yes. Yeah, it has been a challenge with all of that. Not only myself, but moving from Georgia, selling the house, getting here to Henderson, the team, the organization. So yeah, a lot of multifactorial movements going on.
I'm sure you've handled it quite well. So were there any other challenges, like as a coach, navigating through all of that?
Yeah, there really was. Really, when the NFL came down, thank God they allowed us to play, but we had certain guidelines, really heavy restrictions on how many guys we can have in the weight room. So you really had to finagle things. We can only have 10 guys in there. And so we kind of maneuvered things in and around the facility and the building, into our indoor, into our weight room, and outside, and to have the guys moving. So we could have at least a good flow of guys moving. We have, at that time, 80 guys that were moving through, that we had to get through a lift and a run early on. So it was challenging.
I've seen you hold your head together during the NFL Combine, and you never look frazzled. So I'm pretty sure you probably pulled it off. No matter what's going on inside your head, you're keeping it calm on the outside.
Yeah. You got to. Just try to plan it as best you can, and then a good staff. I have an excellent staff here, excellent supporting staff with Coach Gruden and Mike Mayock and the owner, Mr. Davis. So it's very easy for me to get what I need to help make it go.
So, AJ, I think Gray and I have probably known you maybe going on 15 years now. And
yes,
this is the first I realized that you had a sports psychology degree.
Yes.
And of all the background you have, that might be the one that's most important, that may have helped you out dealing with some of the things you've had to deal with. But give us some insight in the listeners on kind of how you got started. Because let's be honest, you're at the pinnacle of what a lot of younger strength conditioning coaches look to aspire to get to, and that's being an NFL strength coach. So give us a little bit of insight of how you got to that point, because you do have a little bit different background.
Yeah, my way is very unconventional. Started off with physical therapy, worked for Dr. Jackson, who was the president of the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons in the U.S. back in the early 90s. So I worked for him and saw a lot of famous people, a lot of famous athletes, and they would come and go. But out of those famous athletes, I would start seeing some reoccurring stuff. And I ended up moving back up to Northern California, and I just kind of wrote down on a dry erase board, sports medicine, and what does it all encompass? So orthopedic surgeon, athletic trainer, physical therapy, massage therapist, and then bam, strength coach. So, I had my strength coach when I played baseball at Long Beach State. And so I was like, let me research this a little bit more. Let me kind of take a deep dive. And this is before LinkedIn. This is before all this stuff was going on. So I just sent my resume out cold. And I sent it out to the Seahawks, Cardinals, the San Diego Chargers at that time, the Rams, Niners, and Raiders. And since I was in the Bay Area, I had replies back from Arizona, Seattle, and the Raiders. And I was fortunate enough that the Raiders brought me on as an intern. I didn't tell them what my background was in terms of sports medicine. I really wanted to have a deep dive. I didn't want to be treated any differently. And I just really grinded out. And I have to thank H. Rod Martin, who was the athletic trainer at the time and is currently here on a remote basis, who kind of saw that vision and kind of made me the first hybrid between the athletic training room and the strength and conditioning room.
No, that's interesting because I think, back then, there wasn't, I think you just kind of alluded to that, kind of give us a little bit more information or background on that, because there is no hybrid, but that's a huge piece of what is part of a good team right now, right, AJ? I mean,
yes.
Right then that was maybe, could be the first one. I don't want to speak for you, but first person that was a hybrid between the athletic training room, sports medicine world, and strength and conditioning. But now it's kind of the norm, right?
Yeah. You definitely have a better mold. Back in the days, there you go. What's up, Max? That's how you guys will come running through. So yeah, back in that day, I hate to say it, but there was kind of a divide between the two rooms, and some of it was just more educational. Not knowing the medical background and not knowing what's going on with surgeries or certain things or how to work around a tendinopathy or tendinitis. And I kind of bridged that gap with H-Rod. So H-Rod had the vision, and he just used me as the tool.
So what kind of led you and some of the other people, maybe give a quick shout out to some of the people that kind of helped you gravitate to more of the strength and conditioning world?
Yeah, at that time, the head strength coach was Tim Adams, and Tim Adams, he accepted that. He understood my background. Kind of a funny story. I had a working interview, and so the two people that I had to do a working interview before I got in was Bill Romanowski and Jerry Rice, and so I had to work with those two guys before I can even qualify to get into the building, and they kind of gave me the proverbial thumbs up and said, "Let this kid roll."
Well, I know one of the areas that we really started to work more together is at the combine. I know the combine's kind of coming up right now. AJ, what's give us a little bit kind of without divulging too much, but maybe a little bit of the background of what's happening right now with you guys, since that is coming up. It's probably where you're spending 16 hours of your day is just trying to figure that out.
Yeah, so getting back to the combine story, even before that, there's a gentleman by the name of John Tureen who was in Indianapolis at the time when all this was coming out. And we were kind of like the satellite team on the West Coast. And I remember being on the phone with John on numerous occasions. And this is all before the internet stuff. So you guys had that big poster that had all the exercises all over the place. And I hate to say it, but nothing matched. And so we cut them all out. And we lined them all up.
That was by design, AJ. We wanted you to call us, man.
It was like, kind of like a Jackson Pollock painting with exercises all over the place. So we just had to cut it up and, we started putting it into things. Here's the correctives for deep squat and this and that. I think we took a picture, sent it back. And then we finally met together at the combine. But yeah, the combine this year, unfortunately, has been canceled. So we don't get a chance to really see those guys. The medical part of it, so I think that's the other part that the people don't realize. There's a huge medical aspect to the combine. So you have your X-ray, your MRI, CT scan. They have a blood panel workup. They have an echo. Performance-wise, we have the FMS. We have the force plate that's there as well. And so there's a couple other things that are deeply involved, the interviews, before they even get out to the field to run around and show what they can do athletically.
AJ, I've got a question since you brought up John Tureen. You guys and John and his group were really invested in the screen long before it was a station at the combine.
Yes.
And, all of a sudden, within two combines, it's a station. So
yes,
you guys got to introduce a lot of young players coming through to sometimes the first screen they ever saw. When was the last time you screened a player at the combine that hadn't already been screened at the collegiate level? Because, by doing what you guys did, and don't think it goes unnoticed, the kind of things you guys did in the pros had a trickle-down effect and started getting some screens done in colleges, I think maybe even before they knew why they were screening, but I think it doesn't take long to realize your strength conditioning program could be refined if you had that information too. So when was the last time you had to tell somebody what the screen was at the combine?
Yeah, I would say, in the very beginning, it was quite a bit. We had to tell them what it was and what's going on. And then it really kind of caught fire. So all the places that do the combine training stuff, they started doing the FMS training with it. But then they had to get some certified people to really go to it. But the past couple of years, there's quite a few guys who already had exposure to the test itself. And so it was really interesting. You're talking about the past, and I'd be remiss to say that when it first came to me, it was a different strength coach at the time, a Jeff Fish, who came up to me and said, "Hey, what is this thing? And it's kind of written in medical lingo. Can you decipher it for us?" And so we kind of did it all together. So having all of us working together was really revolutionary. And then having your guys' insight on that, it is a great way to figure out what you have in a person. It's like a functional goniometer, right? It gives us a great movement blueprint of an athlete. So,
yeah, and one thing you told me, AJ, just kind of sitting back when me going in and helping you guys, because what a lot of people don't realize is really Gray and I, FMS, we're not the ones in there testing the guys. The strength coach is doing that, and obviously, one thing that you told me was interesting is that you want to do as much of the testing as possible, obviously, so you can see what you get out of the movement. But it's also that interactivity you have with the players. And just, you got, let's just say 10 minutes that you got with those players and what you can take away from that aspect along with their movements. Yeah,
you really find out, if a guy's competitive with the test, right? And he, let's just say it's one of those guys who's never seen it before. And, they're very interested, they're curious, but at the same time, they're competitive with the tests. Do they follow directions? As you're giving the instructions to perform the test, how well are they following those directions? And, do they have a vested interest in their score? And, how do they improve? And so you get a good chance to really kind of dig a little on those athletes and see where they're at.
It creates a teaching moment, because when was the last time somebody showed them something physical they had difficulty with? But it does, for those who are open, it does create a wonderful teaching moment. And I love it when a guy like yourself just gives them a pearl about the ankle or about a hip asymmetry, instead of just reading to them the script of what the score sheet says about their screen. You actually use the screen to find the weakest link you can both connect on and you can help them with, instead of letting them think they're being rated and ranked, as a carcass going down the conveyor belt, because that's what it is. It's that quick piece of insight they can't tell you because their athleticism is designed to cover it up.
Exactly. Yeah, you can see the test, and you can have a gentleman, as well as you guys already know, that scores maybe a 12 or a 13, but it's really one thing that's across those 7 tests, or out of the 5. Let's just say it's a hip issue, and you're seeing it on the deep squat. Now you're seeing it on the inline lunge. You're seeing it on the hurdle step. You're seeing it on hip. Well, that's what's screaming. And you'll eventually see it when they go to a force plate. You're like, okay, I got a movement leakage, and now I got a power leakage.
That's interesting. It kind of takes me great segue right there, AJ. You don't even know where I'm thinking about here, but because obviously with the we're saying combine, but you guys are getting so much data on these players, video, all this information even prior to the combine. The combine is just one piece. How do you in your organization and just speak generally, obviously, look at all of this information? I mean, the movement screen is one piece. Force plate data is one piece. Bench press, 40-yard dash. How do you guys decipher all that and figure out, what to do with it?
Yeah, great question. So, when we get those guys on off-season program the very first day, they're considered medically cleared, right? So that's our baseline data. And so we will FMS the whole team. We'll Y balance the whole team. We'll force plate. We'll do a Nordbord, and we'll do a dynamometer for the hand. So we'll look at all that piece of information. Well, really, that's their baseline. So if they ever get injured, now we have their performance baseline of these guys. If it comes to like a unrestricted free agent that comes in and maybe he's had an injury history, and we know that the greatest determinant of injuries is previous history. And so if we could sit there and really kind of look at him and create a specific program that's detailed for that particular athlete, there's some buy-in because they're getting that attention that they needed. And so that's where the testing really comes into play and helps. And it really helps you as a clinician, not only for myself in the strength room, for the athletic trainers for return to play standards. So we could sit there and say, okay, check mobility, check strength, check the GPS because he's done all the mileage. He's just got to go back to playing football.
No, that's a statement that I think most people assume has always happened at the level you're at. If I've got a previous MRI, this new MRI means so much because now I got a historical time capsule of how structures changed. I honestly think people thought 15, 20 years ago we had a way better movement appraisal and baseline coming in. And pretty much we had some physical capacity and we knew what your skill was.
Yes.
And we didn't even know how to link those two things. And I think that going a little bit deeper into movement actually gives you way more proactivity than waiting for a performance to take a dip or a skill to take a problem.
Absolutely.
So AJ, more curious here. Since there's no combine this year, are you personally, as a strength coach, are you having to fly around a lot of these universities and be part of the pro days, or do you just take the information from the strength coach on site? How involved are you in some of that?
Yeah, right now we're kind of in those middle stages. We're doing a lot of the medical background with the athletic trainers, and then we'll follow up with the strength coaches on where these guys are at and do some personal phone calls to the strength coach to reach out to see how are they in the weight room. Unfortunately, no, we're not really flying around just yet. We don't even get to have a chance of the top 30. So the top 30 usually would come in, the top 30 guys that you're interested in, really, and you get a kind of a one-on-one, and we don't get to have that this year. So it's really limited. Right now, our big focus is the current players we have. Obviously, free agency is in full effect. And so the new guys that are coming in, getting them tested, seeing where they're at, and getting them on the way, and getting them situated in here in Henderson and at our facility.
So what's some of the feedback? That's another good question I have. What's some of the feedback you get from free agents coming in with how you operate versus maybe some of the places they've been? Is it pretty positive?
Yeah. A lot of them. We just had a young gentleman yesterday. He came in. He goes, "Hey, new free agent picked up," and he's like, "Hey, I want to come in and work out." I'm like, whoa, not yet. Let's test you out first, right? And I can't manage it if I don't test it, right? So got to test you first before I can manage you. I don't want to just kind of be flying off the radar here. So did a quick analysis. He did have some soft tissue stuff, and kind of an interesting point. He looked great on his FMS, looked great on his Y balance. Force plate was fantastic. Nordbord was fantastic. And, we just started going through some patterned movements with a little bit of weight, and then all of a sudden it started showing up, and I started seeing some hip shifting, some stuff that was already there from his injuries that were compensatory patterns that he was able to pass because he's athletically gifted through the testing. But once I started loading him, I'm like, here we go. I see it. And so gave him some corrective exercises. He was like, wow, I didn't realize it's so pinpointed this way. And I said, yep. And so I think they really really like the detail. It is cumbersome in the beginning, but in the end, it makes everything flow very nicely.
No, I'm glad you said that because a lot of people assume if you get a clean bill of health on the YBT and the FMS, that's a clean bill of health across the board. And that's a body weight clean bill of health. But
that's
you're
correct.
Going into momentum and G-force that most people don't know. And I realized that, and that's where sort of the FCS came out of, getting those loads, maybe investigating why does everything look good but grip strength is down, looking at those carries and jumps. And we do it in a very general way, and you do it in a specific way, but you're absolutely right. And doing that extra level, you're not worried about movement anymore. You're just worried about movement with loads. And that's a neat transition that most people don't get. You never get an insurance policy with one test across the board for all physical demands. So.
All right, so last question, AJ. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Tell us what the Nordbord is.
Yeah, Nordbord. Yeah, Nordbord. It's a kind of like a Nordic hamstring. So you're kneeling, and as you slowly lower yourself, it's kind of giving us that glute hamstring ratio. So I'm looking for the asymmetries between the right and left leg. You have people who are right and left footed, but there should be a common balance of 10% and under. So anything that's kind of outside that range of 10% to 15 is kind of a yellow flag in my head. Anything beyond 15% is a red flag.
No, I like that, because in the old days on isokinetics, we used to do a quad hamstring ratio.
Yep.
And really what you're saying here is it's the balance of the two systems, not the strength of a single isolated system. Correct. That does it. And, I like that.
Yeah, going back to what you were saying earlier, the couple of things I wanted to let my guys know is before they come into the weight room, the number one thing is always safety, right? Is it safe? And so all the testing allows us for that safety. And then number two is mobility. So now we're looking at all the mobility. So is the exercise safe? Do they have the mobility? Now stability. Now, just as you're talking about, loading that body part. And then once you get stability and all those are correct, now you go into skill acquisition, football activities.
Can't go wrong, man. I mean, it makes so much sense. And we see curveballs and we see outliers, Absolutely. But usually you get the explanation at some point. There's one other thing, other metric, but you guys are so tight on those biometrics now, the lifestyle. We know that dehydration, we know that sleep deprivation both can change your YBT way more than a corrective can help it. So doing a corrective exercise when you got a toxic lifestyle doesn't work either. And you guys have been so hyper vigilant on helping these guys realize they've got a really weird lifestyle, but they can survive it. They just need a little bit more feedback. Yeah, most definitely. And I think the number one thing for these guys is sleep. Really, it's pretty amazing how the lack of sleep for these guys. It's especially guys coming from college, right? It's new staff, potentially new offense, new defense, new teammates, new city, everything's new. There's an excitement to that. It's a positive stressor, that they're now getting paid. But at the same token, that positive stressor can affect sleep, which affects performance, which affects, it's just kind of a trickle-down effect.
Performance is a goal for many clients and is the foundation for all skill-based sports and activities. The fundamental capacity screen is a straightforward, efficient, and repeatable method to measure 4 essential movement capacities: motor control, postural control, explosive control, and input control, or simply restated as the developmental movements of climbing, carrying, running, and jumping. Once movement competency is established with the functional movement screen, the FCS is the stepping stone between the functional movement patterns and skill-based coaching. The FCS demonstrates ways in which the 4 fundamental capacities affect sport and physical activity and provides a baseline measure enabling professionals to know where to focus training to reach higher goals. Get started today and find a course near you.
So shifting gears a little bit and being a little bit more aware of their sleep patterns, I wanted to talk a little bit about wearable technology. I have my Apple Watch on right now, and sports science and how we can merge the two. So over the years, we've always evaluated an athlete's performance, but we have this new technology now. How might you be using it, or you would suggest, people pay attention?
Yeah, so the wearable technology, where I'm kind of handcuffed a little bit, and nothing against the NFLPA. We're not allowed to monitor those guys 24/7, so they can't wear the Whoop. I can't have access to that. Those guys can. I just can't have it. Here we have GPS, so we have Catapult, we have Polar, which the heart rate and everything. So we do have those access. We do have sleep studies for these guys where there's a situation where some guy may have sleep apnea. We can definitely get now the interventions with sleep, but unfortunately the wearables are some of the things that we can't dig into because of restrictions from the PA. AJ, I got a way you can fix that. If you can get their significant other in a wearable, they will only be one standard deviation above or below the current state of happiness and readiness of their significant other. So it's a way you could get around it, but we're functional. We're always thinking resourceful when you take our resources away. So find that significant other, put a Whoop or an Oura Ring on them, and ask them to share some information. You know exactly what you're getting ready to work with today. Yeah, exactly. No, true. Very true. No, in terms of those wearables and technology, for us, it helps us building the robust athlete, right? So with the GPS, each coach is different, right? And how they implement practice and training camp and stuff like that. So you could take some of the values that you see and do some reverse engineering for the off-season program. Certain loads for certain positions and such as speeds, high speed distances, anything above 18, above 16. You can look at some acute chronic ratios, some of the Tim Gabbett stuff. In terms of heart rate, it also helps with conditioning. So when we're running the guys, we'll look at the heart rate, and part of the conditioning test is a 3-minute rest. Most of a TV timeout is a 3-minute rest. So I want to see them, if they're in that 90th percentile of their heart rate, I want to see them dropping back down within the 68th percentile by the time that 3 minutes has occurred.
Let me stop you right there and hope that every other strength coach not involved in pro sports just heard what you said. I'm just as interested in how quickly you recover and how normally you recover from a bout of exercise than how high I can get your heart rate. And when I'm not seeing that reasonable recovery off of a load, I think battling ropes is more useful to smoke somebody so you can then see how quickly they're ready to step back into the batter's box and do the ropes again as the ropes load themselves. And so I'm so glad to hear you say that, but I need everybody to know, whether you're teaching geriatrics how to get a little bit longer walk or balance, look at how quickly they recover. And a lot of physical therapists don't realize you're stacking stress on top of poor recovery sometimes. And so at any level, if you're not measuring both, you may as well not measure either.
Correct. Absolutely. And it helps the guys understand, going back to fundamental of breathing, simple stuff, right? So you're in a stressful situation and, control what you can control. You control your breathing. You control breathing in through your nose, blowing out through your mouth. Simple strategy to help your body recover and start that recovery process the minute you stop moving.
We've really synced a lot of you've seen with the toe touch progression and the half foam roll and things, going from the sheer mechanical description of the toe touch progression to a organizational breathing opportunity. We just keep putting awareness, breathing, and control in that sequence together, and they get it. They know how to recalibrate even when they wake up uncalibrated. They realize, I don't have to be in fear or wonder what this is. Let me recalibrate first. And we've seen that. We've seen that hip that just needs to be recalibrated twice a week. And we can soft tissue it for 45 minutes, or they can just stay in the slot for 4 more seconds until they get their balance back. And the cool thing is, once they know that sequence, they can help themselves. It's almost a relationship builder, because now they know their responsibility. You're the reset, they're the reinforcement. And if they don't comply, you can only do but so much.
Correct. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, and AJ, we've been very fortunate. We've worked with teams in Europe and Australia, and I look at how, going into some of those organizations, they're measuring everything on the players, right?
Yes.
I mean, they got GPS data on players during matches and the whole 9 yards. There is a point where it's information overload, right? You're collecting so much data that it's almost clouding what's important. So how do you navigate that and maybe kind of give some insight into, for even some of these young strength coaches who are just getting inundated with this whole idea of sports science?
Yeah, great question. I was very fortunate when we went over to England to play the football games. We got a chance to talk to the guys at Manchester United and see what was going on there. But yeah, you're right. The data can be intimidating, and with the data being intimidating, you really want to kind of pick and choose some things that are equivalent to what they know. High speed is something that they know, obviously your car. So if you take the analogy of a car, you don't drive the car by looking at the gauges as you're driving. You look at the road as you drive. But the two fundamental things you really want to look at is the gas and how fast you're going, right? If you pass the speed limit, there's a consequence. You're going to get a ticket, right? Well, you can overcook your grits with running a guy too far, too fast, too soon. And those speed realms you can determine. Now, that information that you have is like a steak, right? So it's all in how you present that steak. So if I present that steak on a trash can lid or the same steak on a silver platter, it's going to be received better with a silver platter versus the trash can lid. So keeping the information to a minimum, things that guys know, like coaches really understand high speed. They get that if a guy total yards may have ran 6,000 yards in practice, and another guy ran 3,000 yards in practice, but the guy who ran 3,000 yards had 300 yards over 18 miles an hour, where the guy who ran 6,000 yards, he only had 50 yards over 18 miles an hour. So the guy who ran 3,000 yards actually had a bigger, harder day because of the high-speed sprint distance. So they understand that. And then, of course, the cumulative factor. So you give it, you kind of take things out of yards and put it into miles. So coaches understand that. They're like, hey, this guy covered about 4 miles today in practice.
One thing that I think you have done, and some of the guys you've worked with have done, and John Tureen and his guys, and even Rusty Jones did in his time, is you've always been able to discuss the movement screen, the SFMA, the YBT, in a competitive advantage frame instead of a fear-mongering, you're going to get injured if you don't fix this. And so many other people deliver the cautionary tale as opposed to the opportunity, the competitive advantage. Hey, I just found a place you can be improved that everybody else on the conveyor belt of your life didn't see. Let's go for that. And you have both been able to present that to those people who need to understand it at an administrative level and also communicate to the athletes. So you just basically, present the information as a competitive advantage, not as a something that they have to feel guilty for.
Yeah. The other part too is a lot of times people think you're affecting practice, you're affecting this. And there are some things where you can tell a coach and say, hey, listen, we had 2 solid, awesome days. What's your thought process? And, like I said, give it to them on a silver platter. The other aspect is it shows you which guys, could use a little more stimulus in practice, right? They didn't get enough. And you want to make sure that they're getting enough stimulus to prepare them for the game. The other factor with all that information as well is it's a great return to play factor for rehab. So once again, if I know my hardest practice on a Wednesday for a wide receiver is 3,000 yards and about 100 yards over 16 miles an hour. And when we take him out to rehab and say, okay, this guy completed 50% of a Wednesday practice, that resonates with the coach. And if I sat there and say, okay, he's about 75% of a Wednesday practice, okay, great. And then now he's 90%, 100%. Really, he needs to go out there and just play some football. We can only do so much. And so you have to, iron sharpens iron. So you got to get back out there and do it.
No, that's the communication and accountability. You're accountable to that coach for a reasonable projection of the load. And, and you got to deliver, and you got to protect them first. You got to protect the whole situation first. So no, that's the kudos to you for making the frame of that information not more important or less important than it is. Just using it for what it needs to do.
And as well as you guys know, in therapy, you push a particular patient. Some patients that you'll find that they can progress within that protocol, and some you have to stay within the protocol. You got some guys that are, okay, this is a 4-week projection, and actually, this guy's swelling looks good. There's no effusion. He's meeting all criteria. He's, with rehab, he's, 80% of practice. So maybe we're going to get this guy back a little faster because he's doing all the right things. There's no domes. So you could sit there and say, okay, we're going to put a little stress on this particular athlete, and then the athlete comes back, I feel great, no domes. Okay, we can go again. So it really does help in terms of navigating those waters.
No, I think it's healthy that I've heard you and John and some other strength coaches be able to argue both sides. You can argue for more rest and regen, but you could also argue for a little bit different type of stress package. And the fact that you can argue both ways based on your metrics demonstrates to me a lot of integrity, because I get caught in a lot of one-way arguments. Why can't we do more? Why can't we do more? And they'll never say it the other way. Or why can't we slow up a little bit? So sports medicine is inherently over-conservative, and strength conditioning is forced to be aggressive, and yet those are both your parents, and you got to stand right there. And it's a very rewarding place to be because both mean well, but sometimes we need a little bit more stimulus and sometimes we need a little more recovery. And being able to argue both sides of that and not always feel like you got to be one is got to be refreshing, and having the data to back it up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's gotten to a point now where it's even the coaches are like, okay, I saw that race between those 2 wide receivers. They were out there goofing around. Who won that one? And it's like, okay, all right. Now they're interested. yeah, this guy ran 21 miles an hour and this guy ran 21.2 miles an hour. So yeah, he was running faster. So there's some interesting, it gets competitive even with the coaches. So it's fun.
That's good.
So AJ, I've heard you mention a few things during this little segment. One is you mentioned sleep and you mentioned hydration. And when you mentioned sleep apnea, how are you determining if someone has sleep apnea? If you're not measuring their sleep?
No, great. Yeah, that's a great question. You know, we had a gentleman last year. We just started noticing very lethargic in the morning. Overstimulating with coffee, Red Bull, all kinds of stuff. Falling asleep in meetings, or getting tired. Weight gain. There was some weight gain issues and stuff like that. So finally, we got to the determination. Let's do some sleep monitoring on him. And sure enough, we found it. And the minute that particular athlete went on a CPAP, within a couple of weeks, he felt completely different athlete. He's like, I feel so much better. I got energy. I'm not trying to, self-stimulate with beverages and things like that. So that was the one thing that you just kind of knowing your athletes, kind of watching them, you kind of start to know who they are.
And I tell you what, how many guys under your purvey right now have had a broken nose or a concussion? Because those are two things: broken nose, direct airway. You can have a lot of deviated septum, and once you've had that broken nose, it just becomes the norm, and you just deal with it. Same thing with a concussion. Both those things, one indirect, one direct, can both affect sleep pretty meaningful ways. And you won't see it till it's too late, like you did with this guy, where there's a lot of valuable hours in life lost, being sleepy all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And, potentially later in life, it could be fatal. So I don't think these young guys know that. So it's just something simple. Just get it monitored, and all of a sudden you're ready to go.
Yeah. And how much of these guys, especially like you mentioned, the young guys coming in, understand and maybe appreciate or not appreciate all this information and data that you're collecting? Just like you said, you had a free agent come in that's ready to go work out. Hey, let's make sure let's check these boxes off before we just have you jump into the weight room.
Exactly. Yeah. So, I think each year, I think that's another thing about testing, right? Each year, the NFL roster turns over about 35%, last studies I looked at. So it's a big turnover. So you got new guys coming in from the draft, new unrestricted free agents. And so you got a new crop of guys that you want to test and make sure they're doing well. A lot of the guys that are coming from the college ranks, they're like a deer in headlights for the majority of the time. So to slow them down, ground them a little bit, get used to the weight room, teaching these guys rolling patterns, and they can't even, 90% of these guys can't even do it. It's hilarious. So just simple little things like that, where they say, hey, let me go squat, let me go bench press. No, not yet.
What is that an indicator to you? I know a lot of people listening are, I can see why we're doing rolling and rehab, but you got physical specimens. Rolling is out, but they can run a 40. They can do a dumbbell clean. What the heck?
And not foam rolling.
Not foam rolling. Actually, can I go from my front to my back if somebody doesn't let me use my legs or my arm or, something like that?
Yeah, and I think the one thing is like the sleepy glute, right? The sleepy gluteus maximus, right? That's the classic one. So you got these guys, and sure, they can squat 500 pounds and they can bench press 400 pounds, but they can't single leg kettlebell deadlift a 25-pound kettlebell off the floor without falling over. It's classic. So you just put them right into rolling patterns, and it starts cleaning them up real quickly. They don't realize how much energy they're expending to focus on rolling to their backside and then coming back to their front side. But once they start feeling that connection between upper and lower body, there's a little switch that goes off with them. It's pretty amazing.
There's two things that kill the rolling pattern that I've seen. It's obviously an isolation strategy, but we should all see that. Too much running without anything else, and too much power type lifting without anything else. They both somehow make the core think it's a one-trick pony. And the core needs to be 3D, very sensitive, and really sensitive even to those lower developmental positions. And when your activity erodes that circuit, because that's a subconscious circuit, you shouldn't have to think about rolling. Right? You shouldn't have to think about it. You shouldn't have to think about balancing. If I said stand on one foot for 10 seconds, 200 years ago, that shouldn't be a problem for anybody because we walked everywhere. So I do think that just the fact that you're recognizing that rolling. Now, you've got the data that explains exactly why they can squat 500, but you already knew they weren't going to be able to roll because you've got a screen or a balance test that's showing you that disconnect between physical performance and just functional movement.
And one thing you said, AJ, I'll get you to speak to this. What I felt was interesting, what you said, is that these guys get smoked rolling.
Yes.
And they're not smoked because their muscles are getting just drained. It's more neural fatigue that they're, and how would that potentially lead to an injury at a higher level, just having that neural fatigue?
Yeah, definitely. Because, the compensatory pattern, like the sleepy glute, right? It's just not around. So now the hamstring's got to work overtime to take over for the glute. So something simple as neurologically waking you up is key. These guys actually go from sitting down in a classroom with coaches for hours, get up, and then come in here. Now they got maybe a half an hour to get dressed, come into the weight room, get ready to go, and then go out into the field and perform. So if I'm gonna sniper shot these guys, I want to make sure neurologically they're woken up. And so I'm gonna hammer the glutes, the quick rolling patterns, some clamshells, TKEs, single leg foam roll bridges with the opposite X pattern, all the stuff that we do. And like you said, these guys, they do get smoked. It neurologically messes them up. Jason Witten was one of them from last year. He's like, I've never done any of this stuff before. He goes, oh my God, it feels great. And I'm like, yeah. And so just a interesting phenomenon that you see with new guys that come in just a simple little strategy. It takes about 5 minutes. That's an insurance policy for your body to go into practice.
Yeah, and most people need to hear you say that, because really what the athlete is trying to articulate is they stand up. Basically, I'm not going to use a cliche like they got better alignment. Their head is over their pelvis, whether they're static or dynamic. And that's simply less of a biomechanical waste of energy and resources. And it also puts you in a nicer slot for physical awareness of your environment, acceleration, deceleration. So if you can get them aligned quicker rolling than racking them and cracking them, then rolling is way more a thing for the masses. And if you've got to rack them and crack them once to get them to roll, so be it. But if you're doing that every day, it's not hit and save on the document. So I just want people to realize their head is in much better alignment with everything else they're doing, which helps their breathing, helps their body awareness and everything.
No, absolutely. Even the guys that come in now, they kind of hate me because they go through an eccentric block. I think eccentrics are often, missed. They go right into the sexy stuff, right? The performance jumps and all that stuff. But I'm like, in order to control and absorb force, I need you to eccentrically control it. So they go to rolling patterns and movements to eccentrics. And so I'm not a very well-liked guy for the first 4 weeks of their new time here in the weight room.
So you make them eat their movement vegetables before they get their movement dessert.
You got that right.
You're a good parent, brother.
All right, so we want to talk a little bit about working with those athletes. Obviously, you were just speaking about how that one athlete had never done those types of movements before. So each athlete is very different. What about, between rookies and veterans? Are you working differently with them as well?
Yeah, definitely. Some of the rookies, they come in, they don't know how to lift. They really don't. I feel for my college brethren. They're dealing probably with guys who are just now maturing, coming out of high school and going into the college strength programs. As I get them, they're still maturing. Some of them are more advanced than the others, and some of them have been exposed to different things than the other guys. So just trying to get everyone going in the same direction and knowing how their bodies function. Now, with the older guys, we got some injury history, right? We got some OA that's going on within the knees, restricted shoulder, and so there's some things that we can do in the weight room to help them stay in that sport, yet protect their body at the same time as they play this kind of brutal sport, football.
Yeah, and AJ, I think, and also probably use this word maybe not correctly in this context, but a big misconception that you as a strength coach have plenty of time to work these and do the off-season program, do the preseason program, do the in-season program, and work in the traditional periodization. I mean, that's not necessarily the case in your world, is it?
No, you're right. So currently, right now with the off season, we're allowed a limited time with the guys, but in a non-COVID environment, most of these guys probably wouldn't be here. They'd be at home. I think part of it being here in Henderson is we got a lot of guys living here, which is fantastic. But, let's just say we're in a non-COVID environment. April 19th would be the first day that we would have the off-season program. And I only get 2 weeks with those guys by myself. After those 2 weeks, the next 4 weeks are what we call coaching sessions. So I only get 45 minutes with them, and then they start going into football activities. And then after those 4 weeks, then we get 3 weeks of OTAs, 2 or 3 weeks of OTAs. And then that final week is a vet mini camp. And so have a great relationship with Coach. He understands that in that 9-week block, that's why all that testing is really crucial, because that 9-week block, I want a sniper shot for each guy. I don't want a shotgun blast. I want a sniper shot. I want something that's really super detailed, because I know I only got 9 weeks with these guys, and then they're going to be off for another 4 weeks before I get them back for training camp again. So it's got to be detailed in that respect in terms of off season. So it makes it kind of difficult. You want to build some relationships with some of the other trainers that are out there that have a similar philosophy as you. Not that my way is the right way, but I want them to sit there and say, hey, listen, if you do anything, keep up some mobility stuff going on, make sure they get an eccentric block, then go for the sexy stuff.
No, I love that, because when you make that sniper shot, you also get a tighter feedback loop than the person that's generalizing the situation.
Yes.
That means if you wait for the teaching moment, whether it's rolling or a half kneeling chop and lift or a single leg deadlift or a balance beam, whatever you're going to use is your teaching moment to convey what your data says to their weakest link in their language, you do that. Now all of a sudden that time restriction you got, the roof is lifted off, because if you do your job as an educator, they are compelled to manage that weakest link as a proactive investment, and you already showed them. That's what 5 minutes just gave you. And I know you do that with a lot of guys, and so that time constraint every other person in your position feels just got lifted off of you, because now they're your ally. They are actually doing the homework, and most teachers know, I don't have enough classroom time to get this done. It's the kids that do a little bit of the homework and take it serious that actually are going to be the best students. And if you've got more challenges, a little more homework will probably get you out of them. And so you've got that same time to convince that, and all of a sudden they're on the other side of it, and you just doubled your time on the same corrective everybody else doesn't have enough time to do. So that's what I think you do very well, and I want people to know that's an educational opportunity. So.
Yeah, it really is. And the best investment is their bodies. And so once they realize that their investment is their bodies, and taking care of that temple is the number one thing. That's what has longevity in their career.
And how do you manage those guys? Because you kind of painted that picture, AJ, where they're not with you a lot, and they may be living somewhere else, especially before you move to. A lot of these guys may want to stay in Henderson, as you said, in the off season.
Yes.
But when you were in other places, they left. And I mean, how do you manage that? Do you give them a quote unquote packet or workout, whether it's through virtually, or do you just kind of rely on them finding somebody locally? How does that work?
Yeah, so over the years, you've built some great relationships around the country. Flying to different places. I have to say that the Raiders organization has been phenomenal. Prior to COVID, when I first got here in 2019, they had us fly out to see the guys and make that personal connection with them, and to see some of their trainers. And but yeah, on the last day of the season, when they do their exit interview, we'll have a packet for them. It's a generalized packet. One of them is nutrition, right? So now they go from, 3,000 calories expenditure a day to damn near nothing. All of a sudden, you got to make sure they're nutritionally sound, right? But some of those guys, they'll try to go right back into high change of direction, high speed stuff, and I really want them to kind of decompress their bodies. So a lot of it is some rest. Find some other avenues: swimming, hiking. Go into yoga is already in place, but really go into some yoga, some Pilates, and invest into the body a little bit, get some restoration, regeneration. After that, then it's just slowly a lot of straight ahead stuff. They just did 7 months of change of direction, heavy loads. So just get back to technique, form, and running. and then we'll start speeding all that up as time comes near to the off-season program. But yeah, building those relationships with those guys is key, and there's probably about 7 or 8 guys that's in that booklet around the country that I connect people with. Say, hey, listen, I trust these guys. They're going to take care of you. They have the same rationale: safety, mobility, stability, then skill acquisition. Versus let's go to just skill acquisition. Is it safe? No, they just came off of 20 weeks of NFL, and no, we're not doing box jumps two weeks afterwards. So yeah.
You tell these young strength coaches that are working with your athletes in the off season, the best way you can impress me is don't screw this up.
Yeah, exactly.
That's number one. Don't screw this up, and any gains you can make on top of that is good.
Yeah. When I first got here, that was kind of one of the things. I had Jerry Rice, I had Tim Brown, Rod Woodson, Charles Woodson. It was just a litany of Hall of Famers that I'm sitting there and I walk in, I'm like, yeah, I can't screw this up.
John Tureen says the same thing about his first conversation with the GM of the Colts. Like, first order of business, don't screw anything up.
Don't mess it up. Yeah. It was really interesting. I learned a lot of valuable things from those guys. A lot of veterans, they were towards the end of their playing careers, and just watching them, you were talking about earlier, these are veterans who did it consistently on a consistent basis. So I really, my observation skills, I just kind of watched how they moved about. Yeah, they moved a little bit differently than some of the younger guys in the weight room, but that's how they preserved their longevity. So a lot of the conversations that I had with those men that I just talked about helped me shape to the program that it is today. So just kind of listening to those veterans who've done it time and time again.
It's awesome because you were, if you think about the transition in almost everything from the way we work physical capacity to sports medicine, guys like Jerry Rice didn't have a fraction of the resources we currently do. But how many of those veterans have you gone to that were ancient by NFL standards and still seeing a better screen than you see at the combine currently right now?
Oh yeah. I'll give you a classic example. Tony Gonzalez, when I had him in Atlanta, 17-year vet. I mean, this guy was meticulous at everything he did. He was just kind of like a Terminator, how he approached things. I was really impressed to see this man do what he did, and he was way ahead of his time. In terms of how he protected his body and stuff. Some of the cryo chambers and kind of the sleep stuff and all that was really starting to come out back right when he was just finishing up his career. But yeah, watching him, I learned a lot from him as well. This is a gentleman who's best tight end in the game, and he's done it for 17 years and consistently on set for 17 years. So just watching him perform and the way he moved about in the weight room, I learned a lot from Tony.
John had some athletes like that too that would almost do a near perfect movement screen, and when it was so new that they hadn't seen a lot of other people go through it, when these guys scored very, very high in something that we anticipated everybody else is 5 or 6 points below, they looked around and said, you mean everybody can't do this? It's like the people who have made it all through that and still have retained a huge piece of their functional movement. They got a different tuning fork to movement. So when Tony decides to adopt cryotherapy, it's not because he read an article. It's because he is so attuned to his body that he felt a competitive advantage by making that investment, and therefore that investment's going to get made again. But if you're waiting for somebody else to tell you it's good, then it might not be for you right now, but when we see people that are that aware of their body, they're almost blown away that other people can be at that level and not have those physical resources at their disposal.
Correct.
When they see somebody who's got a horrible deep squat, I'm like, I don't even know how this guy can equal my speed. Well, we're talking sustainability and durability now, not performance.
Yeah, so. Exactly.
So talking about performance, I feel like I have to ask, obviously we know a lot of people have been affected by COVID-19, and I'm sure athletes have as well. What has that recovery been like? What's their strength and conditioning program kind of after and during the recovery from that?
Yeah, great question. We had a kind of a task force. We knew that guys were going to test positive and certain things. So within the guidelines and the restrictions of the NFL, once guys could start moving around and coming back, we made sure that they had at least some sort of stretch bands. They had some weights that they could move when appropriate. But once they got back, we go back to the heart rate monitor, right? One of the main things was the heart, like pericarditis with COVID. So we would take them through the conditioning test when appropriate and watch them, how fast do they recover. If they're not recovering, then we're going to, go to the battle ropes. We'll go to the Aerodyne bike just to kind of build that stress back up so it could help them return back to play. So yeah, it was frustrating. A lot of guys, for them, it was kind of a mild cold. Some felt like flu-like symptoms. They weren't out very long, but I think the main thing was that they felt fatigued and tired, and so just kind of combating that was key for our guys to return back to the sport of football.
Thanks so much for being with us, AJ. I really appreciate the conversation.
No, absolutely. No, you guys, listen. It's been awesome. You guys have been mentors for me for all my years. Gray and Lee, like you said, 15, 20 years ago, I was just a puppy in this game. And just knowing and watching your brain and how it's developed and where FMS started and how you guys have come now to where you're at, I've kind of followed that same trajectory, with your guys' knowledge. There's some pretty important people that have helped guide me and all that. So you guys are one of them, and you helped me think in a different box in the strength and conditioning world, and that's helped me out a lot in my career. So I just wanted to recognize you guys and thank you guys for putting me on that guided path. And you definitely helped me go down the rabbit hole, and then I went down further.
Well, no, it's always refreshing. I don't think a holiday goes around that you're not one of the first texts Lee and I get, and It's just, don't need nothing, just checking in on you. And we love to see it because we know you're still alive and the institution hasn't killed you yet. And we got one good soldier out there just doing the job. So it's all good, man.
Yeah, thank you so much, AJ. And really, it's awesome to see how much you have continued to do what you do. I mean, surviving the NFL for as long as you did is no easy task. So so proud to see you've been able to do that. And thank you so much for helping us out today.
Absolutely. No, I got to say, you guys are my first podcast, so you guys have broken me into it. So I look forward to doing it again if need be.
Oh, we'd love to have you on again. Listen, now that we've kind of broken through this, we'll be calling you back. Don't worry.
I love it.
We want some GoPro footage of some rolling struggles, and we'll add commentary to it and all the expletives that come out of a failed attempt at rolling.
Oh man, yeah. This new guy's doing rolling patterns right now before he does his upper body lift. He's probably struggling already.
Just block out their face and let's play with it, man. We'll get the coach's eye out. We'll draw it up.
Exactly. Have some fun.
Thanks,
As
AJ.
always, thank you guys. Appreciate it.
That'll do it for this episode of the Movement Podcast. Thanks for listening. And if you liked what you heard, please take a minute to subscribe and review. If you want to learn more about our system and take the next step in your movement journey, visit us at movementpod.com. Until next time, be sure to first move well, then move often.